Good over there on the wall. What do you think? Good to go? All right, let's kick it off. We'll call the meeting to order. East Bay Charter Township Planning Commission, and we'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance, if you'll please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All right, Ann, can we get a roll call, please?
Sure. Edley?
Here.
Gonzalez?
Here.
Wassam?
Present.
Richardson?
Here.
Ferguson?
Here.
And Leonard.
Here.
And it's noted that Walters is absent and excused.
Thank you. Next up is a review for conflict of interest. Anyone have anything to declare? Hearing none, we'll look at the agenda. Any additions or corrections we need to make? If not, I would entertain a motion for approval.
I'll move to approve the East Bay Charter Township Planning Commission meeting for Tuesday, July 1st, 2025.
Second?
Thank you. We got a motion by Paul, seconded by Steve for approval of the agenda as presented. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Next up is public comment. Please come on up. Anyone that'd like to talk to anything that's on the agenda or not on the agenda, you'll have 3 minutes at the lectern. And please give us your name. It's always helpful.
Hello, my name is Jeff Geiger, East Bay Township, and I'm here for a few of the things on the agenda. The temporary dwelling issue is one of the things I want to start off with here. And thank you all for doing what you've done. It looks like you're moving forward on a draft, although I think it's a little restrictive. I've had some interesting conversations throughout the township. I've went around on my own time talking to a lot of different individuals, and I've gained signatures representing hundreds of East Bay Township residents supporting camping 180 days to 365 days a year. About 80% of those folks did that. I presented those to Claire, let her review those. Some agreed to a lesser time, but everyone, 100% agreed. No, one gentleman did not. Even though he had a camper and did it, just didn't want to sign on. But they agreed some camping needed to be allowed. I'm very appreciative of the fact that you're moving forward. Thank you for getting this legalized in some fashion. I do believe it's too restrictive. East Bay Township Planning Commission first discussed a draft ordinance of 10 days of camping and 45 days a year. That was restrictive for the people I've all talked to, myself as well, my opinion. The Planning Commission new recommendation of only 7 days consecutive and 21 days per year we feel is extremely restrictive and not a realistic expectation. This will continue to infringe on residents' right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I do appreciate that you put in language about tents and tree houses. We're going to talk about that in a second. Residents overwhelmingly do not want permitting process. They do not want to be threatened with or face fines of $100 for the first offense or $200 for the second offense, or anything similar to that. You've adopted some verbiage for allowing tent camping and tree houses for Denver Township. I think that actually is, what do you call that? Elder abuse. None of us old guys are going to get up in a tree house 2 or 3 times a night or sleep in a tent probably. But anyways, that is good that it's in there because that covers a lot of it for kids to be able to camp in their yard, things like that. But we still need to address, on occasions, you're going to have more than one camper in there. I like a lot of things they have in that Denver Township, Newaygo, downstate. They were able to put together what I think is a pretty fair thing, and I would like to mirror this one closer to that than what you're offering. They've adopted the treehouse and such, and the Planning Commission should go further and adopt and mirror their ordinance number 2023-01. That's in your paperwork there. That was presented by the East Bay Township Legal Counsel. They recommended this too, so you got to listen to our legal counsel here, or some form of that. That was something they presented or not, maybe not recommended, but their ordinance allows up to 9 months of camping, is more sensible and realistic, it would make more sense, or as much sense, to have as much freedom as northern Michigan as they do downstate. So I think that's something we really need to go. Let's see, and again, I think you should go with the recommendations, some things they presented, that had a lot of good things on there. When we get into some of the stuff here, I do want to mention that, again, the two separate permits, I think that's going to be very difficult to enforce. I think that's going to be a challenge and overburdensome for, I think everybody here is fairly busy in their day, but I think that's just going to put more paperwork on and more issues. I don't see that happening in a good fashion. Let's see, yours says, again, 7 days consecutive, 21 in a year. That's not what I'm seeing out there. I think you're going to have a lot of people continuing to be criminals, I guess, camping criminals, whatever we want to call them. That's just not realistic. When you get into the waste and everything, we all agree on that. There's ways to do that. I think that's great, have that all addressed. As we get into the Denver Township, Newaygo County, Michigan, they've got a great list here they put together. It looks like it's working for them, too. I don't know, the legal counsel brought this to your attention for some reason. But again, they talk about setback areas. That makes sense. Don't have it right against your property line, things like that. They also talk, if you have up to 1 acre in size, you can have 1 tent or recreational camping vehicle for up to 9 months. And if you have something bigger than a 1 acre parcel, then you can have 2. Yeah, that's getting there, I guess, for people. You still need to address the fact that reunions, memorials, graduations, you're going to have the whole family show up there. So we need to put something, while we're doing this, let's put it together right. We already kicked this down the road. We used to be a charter township. I've been going to meetings off and on here, not as good as I should be, of course. I do watch them online when I can. But from when we had issues when they fixed up the library before they put the roof on it. It's handled a lot different in the township. Things are getting out of hand here in a lot of ways, but that's really important to give us more freedom on this and not make criminals out of our residents. Again, I do appreciate what you got going. Yeah, that's the main things I'd like to say. There's a lot more, and again, I do appreciate you at least getting this out in the open and getting it rolling, but too restrictive in my opinion. And on the slopes, if I can talk about steep slopes just for a second, I've seen a lot of it out there. That's a real tough one. And the fact that people are having to pull up their pavement and driveways, I was one of them, I had to do it, I understand why. I pulled up some that was too close to the lake, but some of these are far enough away from the lake, but such a steep slope because they have too much non-permeous pavement or whatever, and they need to pull some of it up. But it's creating easement issues and also making a lot of people unhappy with your current zoning administrator. Not his fault, administrator. He's got a tough job, I get that. He's a little abrasive for them, but it's getting them in their wallets, and that's really hurting them. And I see the erosion now going right into the lakes. When I was there seeing some of these, I was just not impressed. So I think the township regulation should really be, not favoritism, but looking at it from a sensible standpoint, because, that erosion's going right in there. Faith from Soil Erosion said she did not want me to pull mine up. We pulled it up because that's what the township wanted. So, but thank you. I know you're trying.
Thanks, Jeff.
Gail Mason, East Bay Township. I'm just going to second everything that Jeff just said in regards to the temporary dwelling ordinance. Your proposal is much too restrictive. It doesn't address differently the different properties we have within the township. We have neighborhoods, we have lakefront, we have farms and small acreage, like my husband and I have, and we're all going to have the same rules to follow, and I don't think that is fair. FYI, for those who don't know, I posted on the Nextdoor app a couple days ago, just letting people know about this meeting, letting them know about this issue that was going to be talked about here, and you wanting to rewrite or you going to rewrite the ordinance and come to the meeting and voice your opinion. Well, not too many came to the meeting, but a lot voiced their opinion on the Nextdoor app, and I welcome you to read it. A few of the things that were said were, it's my property, I take taxes. Who the hell are they to tell me what I can do and can't do? Some people threaten to hire an attorney. Well, I can't afford it myself, but if we get together, we certainly can afford it. And there's probably some attorneys out there that are be more than happy to take on East Bay Township. The vast majority think the proposals are way too restrictive, that I'd like to know what does 7 days, 21 days mean? 7 days in a row, 21 days total. What happens after 7 days? Does that camper have to be moved 10 feet? Does it have to leave the property, go to Culver's for ice cream, and come back? What are we trying to do here? And why only 21 days? Lord knows, summers in northern Michigan are short enough as it is, but they are a lot more than 21 days, and my family and friends who live here, who live downstate, who live across the country, would like to come here and enjoy our summers just like we do. And I think 21 days isn't enough time. Somebody driving up from Detroit wants to come for a week. Somebody driving from Colorado wants to come for 2 weeks. Somebody from Florida wants to come for the whole summer because they want to get out of Florida. So I think you need to think about the bigger picture, and you need to just be conscientious that there's a lot of variables you don't seem to have considered. If you did, you haven't put them into your language for the ordinance, and we really would like you to reconsider and take some more time with this. There's no big hurry. Thank you.
Thank you, Gail.
I'm just dying to get up here. So, my name is Tina Wagner. I live over on 4 Mile. I have turned this over to a friend of mine, and he pointed me in the direction of the state law. State law says different. Everybody in here look up the state laws on this. I get that y'all make money every time you have to have someone pull a permit. This is my land. I pay for this land. I don't rent it from you. Why do you feel you have the need to step on that at all? I'm not understanding. I take care of my property. I don't get garbage and junk on my property. This should not be an issue for most people. Whether I have 10 campers, 15 campers, I take care of it. That should be my right as a landowner, and according to the state law, I can. Just saying. I would like to see this totally shut down. I would like to live the rest of my days in peace, not worrying about the township coming after me. That shouldn't have to be a burden on me at my age. Thank you.
Thanks, Tina.
Good evening, Judy Nemitz, East Bay Township. I want to thank the township for posting on their website today our boat launch, Clean, Drain, and Dry. We've had it 2 days, and it's been pretty successful, and people have been very cooperative, so thank you for putting it on there. Regarding temporary dwellings, there's a few questions I have. How are you going to determine storage versus staying? Because those two, it's 4 storage and 1 staying. So that's something you probably need to look at in your ordinance. And then where do houseboats come in? Are you going to classify that? I think the permitting process is a good process. I know, I think you don't want neighbors calling on neighbors and finding out, that they're bothering the township. If there's a permitting process, we know everything is on the up and up, and then it doesn't pit neighbors against neighbors. So I really think we need to look at that. And then many townships and the city of Traverse City and Garfield Township and Long Lake are having a little bit of a transient and it's a very complex problem, the homelessness problem, and have changed some of their ordinances. So I just suggest that we really be proactive in that capacity. Please remember, I think we do need to look at our zoning districts, as the young woman said. In the Lakes area, we have more parks. We have lots of campsites. As pointed out, we have lots of, you can park, camp for a permit on state land, et cetera. So I think that's an important thing to look at with 66 new campsites coming on board at Camp Gray Lake for us all to use. So I think we should look at that as well. And then address tents in a sense, because the River Road people were, someone could pitch a big wedding tent or an event tent or a circus tent, and they could have 150 people on the River Road property, if we recall the problems they were having out there. So I think you need to really define what you mean by that. And then to talk about Denver and East Bay Township, there is a difference. Denver has 2,008 residents according to the 2020 census. We have 11,005, almost 600 residents. So the population is quite different in East Bay Township. They also have 35.8 square miles, and we have 42. I'll break for a minute while Mr.
Never mind.
Gonzalez does that.
I thought I turned it off.
And Ann will be happy to give me a few seconds. We have very close with 42.3, but folks, they only have 1.2% of their area is water. We have almost 6% of our township is water, which is open to the public. So I really want you to think about exempting the lakes area from this based on, those are two different townships and the populations are different, and there's a lot of different demographics, and I'm sure you all looked at that. Thank you very much for your time tonight.
Thank you, Judy.
Walt Behringer, Cross Country Trail. I didn't want to debate camping versus not camping tonight. I wanted to remind the commission what a wonderful job you did in working on rewriting all of the ordinances for the community. And I think one of the themes of that was to make sure things weren't arbitrary and that things were well-defined. I do agree with Judy that if you define a tent or you define camping, how many people can stay in that tent? Could you have a tent with 50 people? Could you have a tent with a couple kids and their parents? So to me, it might be not just number of tents, number of campers. It might actually be number of people, number of bodies. The one thing relative to things being a little arbitrary, I think it's honorable that if someone has lost their home due to a flood, a fire, or whatever, that we're giving them the ability to have a permit for 180 days to camp on their property to rebuild their home. One of the things I was surprised at, you might have a DIYer that decides, or they want to take advantage of the ordinance, and they get a permit for 180 days, and then they renew that permit for 180 days, and then they renew that permit for 180 days. And the next thing you know, 2 or 3 years might have gone by, and that individual is just perpetually renewing a permit and maybe taking advantage of the situation. So I would love to see, if you're going to have a permit process, then maybe you have one renewal and it gives you a year to rebuild your home. Might be more reasonable. Again, I'm not really here to make a position camping, not camping. I happen to live in a community that has covenants and restrictions. We actually have restrictions against temporary dwellings and camping and tents and things like that already. And I'm sure there's other communities in East Bay Township that might be a PUD or have a homeowners association that they're going to have restrictions anyway. So to me, it really depends on what type of property is it, what kind of restrictions might already exist, and things like that. And, just wanted to give you guys some information to make good decisions. Thank you so much. Thanks for what you do.
Thank you, Walt.
Hello, Caitlin Flensky, East Bay Township. Regarding temporary dwelling units, since today is discussion only, and I'm assuming the public hearing will be in August or later, we know this rule will not be changed for this summer's camping season. So because of this timing, like others have said, there's no reason to rush this decision. There are obviously a lot of opinions on this topic. What about the idea of the working group that we talked about in the past? Some great points are being brought up tonight. Maybe zoning districts could vary, or minimums on parcel size. This shouldn't be a carte blanche, one-size-fits-all solution. With the proposed revisions of 7 and 21 days without a permit, there is no way to track or enforce the use. I'm aware of at least 2 campers in a Spider Lake neighborhood right now. I have no idea how long they've been there, or if the township is aware, but at least with the current rule, it's easy to know they're in violation. With the new revisions, it would be impossible to know if and when they're in violation. This discussion started to allow kids to tent camp in their backyard. Then you heard from multiple residents that they've been regularly breaking this ordinance rule for years. Instead of protecting the property rights and property values of the citizens that have respected the rule and purchased property in this area because of these protections, you're now considering amending the rule to accommodate people that have broken it all along. And what about group encampments or the all-night tent ragers on a certain river property? If tents are excluded from the definition, how will you prevent long-term and/or disruptive tent camping? Young kids tent camping in their backyard is not the problem. Please press pause. There is a compromise and a solution to this topic, but it's not going to be resolved this summer, so please take a step back, receive constructive feedback from citizens, and maintain safe, quiet, enjoyable neighborhoods in East Bay. And then regarding permeable pavers, at the November 20th, 2023 Parks Commission meeting, about 33 minutes in, Township Engineer with Wade Trim discussed permeable pavers and how it's nearly impossible to maintain their permeability. He explained the process of needing a special vacuum to clean them regularly, and when they're not, they become impervious within a few years' time. And that's if they're even installed properly to begin with. So who's going to monitor that cleaning schedule? And when it does not occur, all of that square footage will become impervious. East Bay will not be liable since you're proposing a hold harmless letter from the property owner, but our lakes and water quality will suffer from the increased amount of impervious surface on the hundreds of non-conforming lots in the Forest Lakes area. Thank you.
Thank you, Caitlin.
Hello, my name is Matt Martell, East Bay Township. I want to talk about ADUs, assistant dwelling units. You guys put forth a proposal, and it's a pretty wide brush, just no in the lake areas. And I have a unit barn structure already put in with a septic, and it's a bonus area room, and I would like to conform it into an apartment for my son and his new wife. And it's literally 75 feet from my property right now. Both people have lived at my house for many years, and the way that it's written up right now is I can't have my own family lay their head 75 feet away from where they do right now. And it's just such a wide brush that I think it could be looked at as a situation of what and how much land each person has. I understand about population density and the lakes area being really dense and different size properties, and each property is different. And to put a wide brush over it is hurting some people with the market and housing with young people. And I just want to do what's best with my family and try to have them live on my property. But the way it's written right now, it's just not possible. And I want to follow the rules, and I've had some good conversations with other people, and other townships are dealing with the same thing, and they're coming up with some other solutions. So I just don't know if that's something you guys would consider down the road. So thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
Steve McWethy, East Bay Township. I would agree with most of what's been said this evening. This is the first time I've been to one of these, so maybe it's my fault for not paying attention to what's going on in this township. born and raised here, not East Bay specifically, but Grand Traverse. Private property rights is, to me, how did you guys come up with these stringent guidelines? To me, it looks like everybody's against anybody potentially having an Airbnb type thing, because way overreacting. For those that live, you mentioned, somebody mentioned about you live in a community, whether it's a subdivision or a site condo. When you bought that property, you agreed to those rules that they've got. You guys now are coming out with a whole bunch of rules that, to me, don't make a whole lot of sense. It's just being restrictive, and more restrictive. Like she said, we bought the land, we pay our taxes diligently on this land, we should be able to use it. If it's causing a problem with neighbors, I believe there's a nuisance ordinance or something like that that can address that. That's it. Thank you, and I don't know where it's going from here.
Thanks, Steve.
My name's Scott Huey. I live in East Bay Township. I wanted to address the camping, tent camping, and treehouse. To me, it's almost absurd that you guys have got to write regulations for somebody to put a tent in their backyard. I mean, this isn't a gated community. East Bay Township is not a gated community. This is an outdoors area. Michigan's outdoors. Up north is where people come. You have campfires. It seems to me that a property owner ought to be able to have their grandkids come and stay in a tent, or their cousins or their friends, for more than a week or 2 weeks if they want to in the summertime, and enjoy it. And the thing about having permits after so much time, what's the point of that other than a money grab? You got campfires, camping. The next thing we're going to have, you got to get a permit for so many campfires. You guys are pushing this thing too far, I think. I'm with a lot of these people here. We're property owners. It's our property. It's things that have gone on for years. My family was in neighborhood development years ago. We didn't have all that kind of stuff. And there's neighborhoods around here, and they probably have HOA situations, but I live out on Spider Lake on Hobbs Highway, and if I wanted my grandkids to get in a tent and camp for 2 weeks, or they ought to be able to do it. You guys shouldn't be telling us we can't do that. And I just think that bureaucracy, it grows and grows, and more regulations, tighter and tighter. And I can get some of these things about big camping trailers and 4 of them there, and there's 50 people, like the gentleman said. You have noise ordinances or nuisance that I think can handle those things. But, you say, well, we're not talking about kids camping in the backyard. Well, but you are. To sit here and think a kid's got to have if he wanted to stay in his tree house and look at the stars all summer and camp out, he can't do it. Somebody's going to call him and going to get a permit and pay a fine. That's ridiculous. I'm sorry. That's my opinion, but I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Going once, going twice. There's only a few of you left. All right, we'll close the public comment and bring it back to the group. We've got some correspondence in front of us, just to kind of talk through it. You want to set the table for us here, Claire?
Yeah, so the, no additional correspondence beyond what was emailed to you through the Planning Commission email, beyond just the flyer that's on your desk for the upcoming open house. It's also on the township website. And then also just wanted to mention that there was a township resident, and as was alluded to in the public comment, that did go door to door, collected over 100 one-page surveys that basically asked for a name, signature, address, and whether or not they were in support of camping. So the individual did not provide a copy of all of those surveys for me, but I did review them all this afternoon. So there were over, I can vouch there was over 100 of them. The majority of them were in the Lakes Area District, and all of them that were provided were in support of camping. The majority were in support of year-round camping. No limit on that, but just wanted to provide that as an update, so.
Got it. Thank you. Any questions for Claire? Okay, moving into reports. Maybe I'll turn to you, Claire, then for township updates, because Mindy's not around for the township board.
So I would just refer to the minutes from the township board meeting, because I don't have that top of mind.
Fair enough. Sorry to put you on the spot. Paul, the ZBA.
No meeting in June, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, and then back to Claire. Anything new from the planning and zoning we need to know about?
Yeah, we've got a few. So one, I will just mention, I did meet with Matt, who made public comment regarding ADUs earlier this week. Encouraged him to come to the planning commission meeting. I have had some conversations with Long Lake Township. They're working on the ADU ordinance, and I know that we looked closely with our zoning ordinance at ADUs, decided not to allow them in our environmentally sensitive areas. But one thing that Long Lake Township is looking at that I thought was interesting was just that they are looking at allowing ADUs on lots that are legal conforming to the size, so they meet all of the size dimensional requirements. So for example, in the Lakes area, the majority of the parcels are, 0.15 acres or a quarter acre. And so that's, that's very high density in an environmentally sensitive area to be looking at having a home plus an ADU. So I thought it was kind of a unique approach that Long Lake was taking, where they were allowing ADUs on parcels that met the minimum dimensional requirements. And so for our environmentally sensitive areas on, Boardman River, that's, I believe, 2 acres right on the river. For the Lakes area, that's 40,000 square feet. So about an acre. So I think that would be a reasonable policy for the planning commission to take a look at. I know we've got a lot of ordinance updates, so would be interested, and you guys could provide feedback on the kind of at the end of the meeting as we ask for any future agenda items, but just wanted to mention that. Also wanted to mention minor amendments. So I approved a minor amendment for Live East Bay, which is former Brigantine Apartments. They moved the trail to save some trees, so it's outside of the road right-of-way now. So it's still along the road, but it's a little bit further back. They're just getting an easement, but I thought it was some nice design adjustments just to preserve the trees. Also approved a minor amendment to Crimson site plan, so that's the 240 units right off of 3 Mile. They did a lot line adjustment because there was a neighbor's fence that for years had been on their property, and so instead of making the neighbor take it down or move it, they did a very minor lot line adjustment to allow the neighbor to keep the fence. And so it resulted in, just a few feet of moving of the parking and structures, but very minor. Grand Traverse Road, there was also a wetland delineation that showed wetlands kind of right along the road right-of-way, where the trail is going to be going along 3 Mile, the trail that they're required to build. I did follow up with the road commission, and they have received permits from Eagle. Those are to wetland permits for that, so those are no longer going to be wetlands. They're going to be filled as a part of the 3 Mile road construction project. So the developer will move forward with putting in that bike trail. So.
Nice.
And then the last thing, I just wanted to plug the open house, July 30th. That's going to be for the East Bay Beach District. It's one evening. We've got 2 different opportunities for engagement. We'll be here at the East Bay Township Hall from 4 to 6, and then we'll be at Hopscotch from 6:30 to 8. So would love to have members of the public stop by to provide feedback and learn more about the Beach District implementation process.
Sounds good. Any questions for Claire? Okay, Moving on to meeting minutes from June 3rd. Any additions or corrections or alterations we need to know about?
I'd propose that we accept the Plan Commission meeting minutes of June 3rd, 2025.
Thank you. We got a motion by Paul, seconded by Renee for approval of the meeting minutes from June 3rd. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Next up is new business. And first out of the blocks is temporary dwellings. I think maybe it would be helpful before we get too far into it is maybe just like a real 30,000-foot view as to kind of how we've got here, just because I know we've got some people in the crowd who might be drinking through a fire hose, figuring out why we're taking this on. So maybe just a real high level would be helpful, Claire, before we get too far into it.
Yeah, so just a little bit of background. We, the Planning Commission took this up, I would say, several years ago. We had brought to the attention of the Planning Commission just the fact that we had had inquiries from people that were interested in pitching a tent, interested in having, neighbors, family, stay in a camper on their property. And so the ordinance that was in place at the time and the ordinance that's currently in place at a time does not allow any type of camping on the property. That was the current state of the township policy. That's, as far as I can tell, has been the township policy for years. So when we began this process, it was really an attempt to allow some more flexibility and greater use of property. And so that's where we are at this point. Have had a lot of conversations with adjacent communities about how they're handling it, have had conversations with Township Legal Counsel, and a lot of listening to public input. So that's where we are, why we're here. Just a little bit of additional background based on your discussion and direction from the April and May discussions. I've consulted in quite a bit of depth with our Township Legal Counsel just to get some additional guidance on the temporary dwelling ordinance. Legal counsel did provide some examples. So one example that's in your packet is a police power ordinance, and I provided that as an example, not necessarily because I think that those specific provisions are appropriate for East Bay Township. I think that East Bay Township is a different community, and so some of the policy direction that has been brought forth by the Planning Commission is probably more appropriate for our township. But I did want to provide an example of a general law or police power ordinance versus a zoning. So there's two different ways to handle it. Right now, the way that it's drafted is to address this through zoning. We did work with legal counsel to develop a definition of temporary dwelling, and there wasn't one previously. I think that this definition does do a nice job of covering what a temporary dwelling is, and it also specifically exempts backyard tents and tree houses. So backyard tents and tree houses would not be considered temporary dwellings. They would not be subject to any type of permitting. They would not be subject to any type of use restrictions. It's basically just within the definition saying that tents and tree houses are not considered temporary dwellings. To address some of the comments related to, circus tents or wedding tents or, those types of things, specifically states backyard tents and tree houses located on a residential lot or parcel and used primarily and sporadically for overnight accommodation by the occupants of the principal dwelling on the same lot or parcel. So to me, that's a very, very clear language that would be for occupants of that. That would be as intended to be used by kids or family or someone staying the night, so.
Got it. No, that's helpful.
I think that does do a nice job explaining that. We also added some specific waste disposal requirements. You'll see that's under number 5. All waste must be properly disposed of, and no sewage or wastewater from a temporary dwelling shall be discharged into ground surface, et cetera. And then we also, let's see, and then also amended the duration. So you'll see that I have amended in the draft, and it's subject to Planning Commission direction. I changed it from the 10 days, 10 consecutive days, and not more than 21 days at a time. I changed it to 7 days and not more than 21 days. And the reason behind that, one is just that we did follow up with Township Legal Counsel, and because zoning allows for legal non-conforming uses, it's easy to increase the allowances, increase the number of days, but it's harder to dial it back because a community member could, say we allow 100 days or 60 days, and then the township decides to dial it back in the future. The case could be made that it's legal non-conforming, they're previously allowed X number of days. So I think that it does, from a policy perspective, make sense to start small and build up. I also think that this is a better route to rein in the possibility of abuse of the temporary dwellings without going the permit route. So taking a look at other communities and talking at length with legal counsel, I would not recommend permitting requirements for temporary dwellings that are, that short duration. The way that this ordinance is drafted, the Planning and Zoning Department would be issuing land use permits if it was for a dwelling in the event of a fire or emergency or those types of things. So those are covered under Section 436B6, the temporary dwelling, the permit for up to 180 days. So that would be a permit. But I think that we are going to run into challenges with permitting those because it just creates another avenue for a violation, which is a violation of not getting the permit. I think that if we do have bad actors that are, not seeking a permit and exceeding the number of days, we have other mechanisms for enforcement, and so I think that the people that are getting the permit are likely going to be the people that are following the rules for the duration.
Got it. Makes sense. Any questions for Claire?
And the last thing that I would just add, I would recommend, I realize that we didn't include the part about temporary dwellings may be permitted for farm laborers during the normal growing season. That was in the previous ordinance, and it just didn't make it into this draft, so I'd recommend putting that back in the draft.
Would that be under B7 then? Or moving everything down a bit?
Yes, B7.
B7, okay. The only other point to bring up, which is just a simple clerical thing, was under B1. It references 436B5, and I think it needs to be B6, just because we added that 5 in there.
Good point.
Beyond that, just to kind of keep the conversation going, this is a discussion, right? And the goal for this evening is to kind of talk through this. If it's something we're comfortable with, it'd be setting it up for either punting, the options that are out there, correct me if I'm wrong, are kind of like punting, putting together a group, talking through it more, moving forward with this, scheduling it for a public hearing with some amendments or some adjustments, and referring it over to the general public to have a look at it, so we can publicize it and have the public hearing and all the forward-thinking things that need to take place. But I wanted to kind of talk through just systematically a couple things. One is probably the duration. That seems to me to kind of jump off the scales. I know that this is dialed back from kind of where we were a couple months ago. Kind of want to get people's thoughts. What do you guys think? Is this too short? Is it too long? Give me some feedback.
I was an advocate for longer, and honestly, if it were me, I'd go even longer than what I recommended. I'm trying to find a happy medium for everybody, but, I mean, I get this as a starting point, but I would go longer.
Sure.
Actually, sorry.
Go ahead, Paul.
I was kind of surprised when I saw that it was 7 to 21. I said, whoa, where did that come from? And I also am an advocate for being longer, even starting out of the box, having something that's more reasonable than this date, whether 7 and 21.
Okay.
I think, for me too, I guess the way we started on this when it was, in our ordinance, we all kind of were surprised that it was not allowed. And I started with, you mean, we're not allowed to have a tent in the backyard for our kids, And then, I guess the way I look at this is that we're trying to avoid, people impacting their neighbors and making the neighborhood or their neighbors feel woken up at night, and, parties going on, things like that. That was always my intention. And I think if it's not happening, then it's not a big deal, in my mind. So, I mean, I would be fine with even longer, whatever, 180 days. I mean, during the camping season. As long as they're not impacting their neighbors, then I think that's fine, for me. So, I mean, I guess I worry that as we go down this road, there are so many variables that you're going to end up trying to define. 7 days, setback from the lot lines, acreage. You get to a point where you're like, how can you do that? I mean, there's so many variables, I think. So I guess, I would lean towards being lenient, but then enforcing noise ordinances, whatever else we can to make sure that it's not impacting neighbors.
Sure.
So Claire, where did the 7 days come from? Just talking to legal and having the ability to start low and slow and open?
Yeah, talking with legal, the fact that it would be, as a zoning ordinance, it would have that legal non-conforming. And just the strong recommendation from legal not to have the permitting for these very short stays, that would be a very challenging thing to administer. And so, okay, if we're not permitting, is there a way that we can better enforce? And so, if somebody comes to us and says, hey, there's been this camper here for a while, it's easier to kind of to track that for a shorter time duration. If we, if we have a camper that's been there for 2 months, and then we have to allow it there for monitor it for another 2 months, because that's the amount of time that it can be, that it just makes it a little bit more challenging. So if you have a problem, then I am, certainly, willing and interested in your guidance, and I would look to you for guidance on that duration. Our legal counsel really didn't have guidance on the duration, and so I think it's ultimately a policy decision from the Planning Commission.
So if we look at this holistically, you're right, it does not exist in the current ordinance, right? And so it was a question, are we allowing grandkids in the background in a tent? And with the updates that Claire has made, tents and tree houses are not impacted by this. So we can take that off the board. The other item is no short-term rentals or commercial use. And I think that commercial use is like hip camp and some of those other things. I do like the verbiage of the disposal, not that we can manage that ourselves, we just, have to take everyone's word that they are disposing of properly. We are covering people who are in a need as it relates to construction or fire, something like that. So I think the point that you made, Claire, about the 7 and 21 is, we don't have it today. If we allow it, it'll be a low and slow. We're not going to open up Pandora's box initially. We can take a look at it in a future date and see if that needs to change. But knowing that tents and tree houses are not considered, temporary dwelling units, that your grandkids can stay in your backyard. I think it's a good start, but I also think, based on some public comment, timing of this, how long is this going to take us to get through the process? If we make recommendations today, or you're going to come back in August now,
with those changes. And then if everything's agreed upon, then it's going to be September for public hearing. And then that's the end of the summer, so we're not even going to make it for this year, right? So do we take it back and do we do work groups, like we've done in a number of different items? Is there value there so that the public can participate more and there's more dialogue, where this is just, comment and we're taking what they've said into consideration as we build out this ordinance?
How often, Claire, does the planning, zoning, or Bill field complaints about campers?
I wish he was here tonight, but he is on vacation. Very rare,
Very.
yeah.
Let me introduce, the thing that I try and wrap around is the fact that we don't really consider the different sizes of property. For instance, we only have one temporary dwelling is allowed on any single zoning lot. Well, if you have, the person that's got a quarter an acre, that's one thing. But if you got 100 acres, or you've got, 20 acres, more realistically, it seems that there'd be some more allowance to increase the number of campsites that you could have, and whether you say anything, up to, an acre is this, up to 5 acres is this, and up to 10 and above is this, something of that nature. But it just seems that we have one per everything, and unfortunately, we can't make a rule that's going to abide for all situations. And I think that this one is glaring to me, that we don't have any differentiation between the size of the property.
I did put some draft language in that stated, I believe it was, if the parcel is up to 1 acre, a maximum of 1 temporary dwelling unit, and then 1 per acre up to 5, and then with a maximum of 5 temporary dwelling units. So that was something that I drafted and then deleted just because we hadn't had a policy discussion about that. I believe that the last, this time that the Planning Commission discussed limiting the number, you kind of agreed upon 1 per parcel regardless of size. I know that there was some discussion about the fact that we allow up to 4 vacant RVs to be on a property, so you've already got 4. If you have an additional 5, then that's 9. So I think that it does start to add up, but again, that's another policy discussion, and that is something that I was considering and drafted and then got rid of, just because it seemed like it was starting to overcomplicate things a little bit.
I would agree with that. I was going to suggest that 1 per acre up to, with a max of 4 or 5.
I like 4.
Yeah, I could do 4.
What about the storage versus stay? Because right now,
That would need to be done through our enforcement officer would need to go out and take a look at the parcel and see, what's being lived in and what's being stored.
Right.
So would be done through the enforcement process.
Now, if tents are not counted in this, is there any limitation on the number of tents a person may have?
Not as drafted. but
Not as drafted.
The intent of the tents is that they are being used by the principal property owner, homeowner.
Yeah,
So-
I understand,
So that there's some
but it just seems to me that,
logical decisions that are made based on the residents in the house and how many tents are out there. It can't be, they wouldn't be exempt on a vacant parcel. They would
Right.
only be exempt on a
true,
residential use.
true, but
single
it just
family.
seemed to me that there's something in there that something needs to be addressed as to the number of tents that people can have. Because, let's face it, you get a family and you got boys and girls. you're going to should have 2 tents.
I don't think that's what's going to cause the complaint, though.
Well, I'm not going to get into the whole nitty-gritty, but it just seems from a logical standpoint, there are some natural divisions there.
I think we could dig ourselves into a rabbit hole till next week on the sucker. And that's kind of where I'm coming into, like, that principal language, having a principal dwelling, to me, is the most important piece to the tenant conversation. It's like, there's going to come into some common sense to a point of, there's so many people living here, you're only going to have 1, maybe 2 for people that are there. If they're having a party, they're probably going to have a party, and then the noise complaint will kick in. And like, those are the mitigating factors, to me, that's going to regulate how big and how many. You know, it's not going to be, what we don't want to have happen is, we come up with an arbitrary number of tents, and then the neighbor's like, hey, he's got 3, and he's only allowed to have 2, but they're being quiet. You know, so I kind of think through, like, the neighborhood police are going to take care of the number, and I just don't know if we're going to get into that, solving that one.
I don't know how good the neighborhood police are. The neighborhood police either A, look the other way, and that's fine if they want to. But I think a lot of other people are afraid in a litigious society that they say something and all of a sudden one neighbor's going to be suing the other neighbor. So I can see where a lot of people will not perform what we think they're going to be doing. But I still have my reservations as to trying to make one size fit all, especially when it comes to the size of the property. And quite frankly, I think the tent is a little bit of a loophole. Something needs to be addressed about that.
I like the idea of the size conversation, and allowing potentially more with a max of 4 in my mind, and that goes back to the regulations we already have. It's tied to 4 for storage purposes. But to me, what I don't want to have happen is have 4 that are being stored and 4 that aren't being stored, because as a zoning administrator, how do you know, right? So, like, maybe it's 4 and it's at the owner's discretion whether they're being camped in or stored. At least we've got a starting point of there's a max of 4 on any piece of property.
Yeah.
So then it's like, then we get into your size calculation and bumping it up. And I actually don't mind your suggested language of larger, maybe it's as simple as that with a max of 4, if folks are comfortable, because I agree, you don't want to have 4 of these things on
I
a
was
quarter-acre piece of dirt.
surprised to hear you say that I forget how you said that, but I remember having that conversation. I definitely would have supported that, not been against it. So maybe the majority were against it, but I don't remember that. But I thought you made an interesting point when you were talking about the ADUs and how, was it Long Lake, was talking about some, dimensional requirements for the property. And I thought, well, why wouldn't we treat this the same way? Because I do think it's unfair. It's like, for instance, the Lakes people. I completely understand where so many are coming from. And I think that when you do have these very small lots, which so many are, I understand their concern. But then you take all those people that have large lots that are in favor of this, and they're exempted because of whatever. So I do think that it would be good to look at that again. I'm not against your language that you were going to put in. I think that would be a starting point. I absolutely was shocked to see the 7 and 21. I don't like it. I understand that we should start small, because I do agree, I am not in favor of the permitting process. I think that's just adding more insult to injury to our admin. It's just, I don't think we need to overcomplicate this. So I think that starting small is okay, but this seems a little bit ridiculous. I think overall, campers and people are good people. You're always going to have a bad actor. I've said it a million times, and I will say it again. I don't care what ordinance we come up with, I don't care how good it is. There's always going to be somebody that doesn't follow the rules. It's just the way it is. But we can't assume most people are bad or not going to follow the rules. So I think it's a good starting point. I would like to see the 7 and 21 change back to what we had it. Because I still think even that falls under the starting small. We definitely are making good strides in the right direction from where we were at. But I'd like to see a few of these things change.
What would you suggest? 10 and 30?
Well, where were we at? We were at like 10 and 45.
I wanted I was at 45.
10 and 45.
Was it? Okay.
I thought
Yeah.
that was not enough, but all of a sudden we're not. So yeah, I would go back to at least what we all thought was reasonable.
So I have, and that's, thank you. So the reason I had bumped it down was just because I felt like the permitting was not something that was going to be something that we could administer. So sounds like you guys are comfortable with not permitting.
I am. And I don't think under
And-
10 and
and we can-
45 you would
We
have
can
to.
go back to the 10 and 45. We can add a provision that allows one temporary dwelling unit up to an acre, and then you can have one per acre up to 4 total. And that's total number of
Total number of-
RVs on your property.
Yeah.
So not more than 4, and you can decide how you want to use them. And then the last change that we discussed was under B7, specifying that farm laborers during the normal growing season. So those are kind of just a summary of the changes that I'm hearing the majority of the planning commission in support of.
So can you go back and repeat? You can have recommendation for 1 per acre up to a maximum of 4. You could have 4 that are being utilized and 4 that are being stored, or only 4, period?
Only 4, that's what I heard from the planning commission.
Okay.
So if you're
Only
storing
4.
4 on
Thank
your
you.
parcel, then you're gonna have to
Okay.
allow people to stay in them.
And it's at their discretion on how they use that, meaning the landowners. Yeah.
Now, when you tie that in to the outdoor storage item, I guess it'd be, I guess you could ask legal, how do you tie that in? It's because the outdoor storage is any combination of different items, cars, but here we're talking about a very specific item.
Right.
So just to make sure that we're saying that this doesn't mean that you can have 4 campers and, 3 motorcycles, and you know what I'm saying?
I believe it does. My understanding is that you can have a total of 4
In combination.
Yes.
4 items that meet our definition of temporary dwelling unit, whether or not they are vacant or not. Whether.
That I agree with, but I'm just saying is that it goes back to,
Storage.
yeah, the outdoor storage, personal items is a combination of different types of things. And I'm just saying is that you want to make this, we're dovetailing that. And we're saying if you choose to have 4 campers, it's going to be 4 campers and that's it. It's not going to be 4 campers and the motorcycles and the jet skis. All I'm saying is that you tighten that together, that now these agree with each other as opposed to creating, a wobbly situation where there's ambiguity.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think that would be nice to wrap up. 'Cause
So if we're going to make a recommendation to look at it by parcel size, we've been asked a number of times to exclude the lakes area. So I know I've asked for appetite previously, but if we're going to do this,
She had signatures of people in support of it. So I'd
we
like to
have
put,
signatures from Protect Forest Lakes for 178, right?
But I think that goes back to, we're trying to find the happy medium for everyone. And if we exclude the lakes areas, that excludes East Bay tax-paying residents in the lakes area that are in favor of it. If we go to the parcel size, then I think it's more accommodating for everyone. Because I mean, I just don't think that we as planning commissioners should be in that kind of position where we start deciding that this group's excluded but this one's not, and I just think that's opening up its own Pandora's box. I don't think it's right. I think we need to look at all East Bay residents, and we have just as many, probably more. Let's face it, we all know more people will sign petitions against something than for. So Jeff, I commend you for going out and getting those surveys, because I've said it for a while. There's a lot of people out there that are in favor that just haven't spoke up, and now they are. So I think it's unfair to exclude them.
I kind of feel like we've gotten the points that we were trying to get addressed. Is there anything else that we're missing that we haven't touched on here?
I wanted to, so there was a woman in public comment a couple times who had the giant party across the street with lots of tents and every year, and it wakes everybody up. There were tents, right, on the river?
Yeah, it's less than 1 acre. I think it's like 1/3 of an acre. It's vacant.
Vacant,
So the way
they-
that this
would not be allowed.
The way this is drafted, they could technically have 1 camper on that parcel.
Do they have a house on that property?
No.
So they wouldn't be allowed.
Because they wouldn't have a primary resident.
We
Tied
are
to-
allowing a max of 1 temporary dwelling unit
Could
is
be a
allowed
camper,
on
not a
any
tent,
single
'cause a tent
zoning lot,
would
either
require
in
that-
conjunction with a permanent dwelling or on a vacant parcel of land, the way it's drafted right now. So they could, we have been in contact with that property owner. We've got our CPOs know the weekend that party generally is. So it's something that we are proactively looking to address, and through the noise ordinance.
Okay.
Yeah.
As well as through our current zoning requirements related to temporary dwellings.
Right. Okay.
I still just go back. Yes, Jeff brought forward 100 signatures, but Protect Forest Lakes brought forward 178. I think I've got that number right. And they have consistently been here and working through all of the work groups and such. So I think they deserve our respect as well in their request.
I can respect that, but that's also why I feel like we're trying to find a happy medium with the time constraint, the maximum per, where on some of the other signatures and some of the other opinions, I don't want any restrictions at all. I want to be able to camp on my property whenever, however I want. So by finding that happy medium all the way around, we're trying to accommodate everybody, is my feeling.
I agree.
Claire, what was your suggested, or what you had written and then struck, the acreage?
Oh, it was the maximum of 1 on a parcel that's an acre or less,
Okay.
and then up to 1 per acre
Okay.
with a
And
maximum
that's
of
what we're
4.
considering now. Right.
I think a big concern for the lakes and sensitive environment people is the waste. I think that's one of the main concerns that I've heard over and over again. And I think that the majority of people, and especially campers, are not going to just dump their waste on the ground. There's always going to be bad actors, there just is. And we all know that the septic systems in the lakes area are a problem. I'm fully aware of a property recently for sale that has absolutely no room for a septic and is currently using a barrel. It is a barrel. So we know that those exist. I think that, we're kind of trying to penalize campers because of a problem that's already existing, and I don't think they're going to be the bad actors that we think they are. That's just what I believe.
Do you need anything else from us?
I would be looking for direction as to if you wanted to set a public hearing for the next meeting, or if you want to come back with an updated draft to review.
I think we need an updated draft to review before we go public hearing.
Okay, yeah, let's do
Right,
that.
it's the summer, so like you
Yeah.
guys said, why rush it through? Let's get the
Yep.
draft updated.
let's do a draft for August. Can you get that? It's July, yeah, oh, Jesus, sorry. Sorry, August.
July
Agenda for
already.
August, I think Camp Graylock is going to be on the agenda for August, so it might already be a long meeting.
Okay, okay.
Is that, okay, I heard that they were pushing that back to.
And they might be. I haven't
Okay.
heard any updates, so
Okay.
that could be the case. But last I heard.
You didn't have any internet, so how could you get your email?
It was-
With your lightning strike.
How about at the next appropriate time?
Okay,
Bring it back.
that sounds good.
Okay. All right. We've gotten through 1. Now we're on to B. Steep slopes. Same deal, different conversation. This is something relatively not new, but new to us. I don't think we've gone through this one too much to date, but Claire, do you want to kind of tee us off?
So, sorry, I'm just writing this down so I don't forget. So for the steep slopes, as I'm sure you're all aware, the limitation on development of steep slopes is an important zoning tool to limit erosion and also to protect water quality. So tonight, I wanted to revisit the definition of steep slopes. So our previous ordinance had a complete prohibition on slopes in excess of 80%. Our new ordinance, and that was based on some members of our advisory group in our environmentally sensitive area, the new ordinance defines steep slopes as anything over 15%. So, based on some expertise that we had in that group, we moved forward with it. But we've found that in practice, this has resulted in private property owners paying thousands of dollars for a geotechnical engineer to come on site, take soil borings, and develop a slope suitability analysis for these slopes that are 15%, basically saying that they may be safely developed. So we're finding that any of the slopes that are between, 15% all the way up to 30%, the geotechnical engineer goes on site, they take the soil borings, they're going to say, as an engineer, they are going to say, it is suitable for development. However, it's after very costly engineering that the applicant has undertaken, a private property owner, homeowner has undertaken very costly engineering expenses. So I guess from my perspective, it doesn't appear that this provision has kept development from happening on those slopes that are kind of between 15% and 25 to 30%, but it has just significantly increased the cost. So we have reached out to some of the experts. So we've reached out to the Watershed Center. They provided some examples of ordinances in other communities. Reached out to the Health Department that administers soil erosion and sedimentation control permits. I reached out to the County Drain Commissioner, our township engineer, also a geotechnical engineer that has been kind of helping do a lot of these studies. So for some of the private property owners. So I also reviewed ordinances from other communities, and I guess just wanted to introduce this tonight. I know that it's a new topic, and we just recently amended the ordinance, so I was hesitant to, bring this new ordinance amendment forward, but I do think that it notably is having some significant cost burden on some of our applicants that are looking to develop. And I just want to make sure that cost burden is also in proportion to what the purpose we're looking to serve as. So a few policy considerations. One is just that Grand Traverse County Health Department, they set a 20% trigger for when they issue a permit. That was an ordinance that was adopted in 2017 to 2018. So again, they do definitely issue permits for slopes much steeper than that, but that's kind of their trigger for when they go out. The next one is this geotechnical engineer that we reached out to. He had us look at the, under Part 353 of the Sand Dunes Protection and Management. Eagle protects coastal areas, and it does not allow for any type of development in critical dune areas on slopes of in excess of 33%, which is like 3 foot height, 3 feet, and then 1 foot vertical. So unless unless a special exception is sought. So it's similar to like a variance. So according to our township engineer, that 33% slope is it's typical, it's considered the maximum slope to expect stabilization using like topsoil, seed, mulch, like, so kind of more like natural materials. That's generally what engineers consider as like an acceptable slope to develop on. Also, I would mention, we've got the USDA has a web soil survey, and that's a really nice resource. And so they basically categorize all of the different soils and and also what the slope is kind of throughout the entire township. So you can zoom into any parcel and see what the slope is. And they have a category that ranges from 18 up to 25% slope. So a threshold of 25% slope would be a reasonable policy option, just in the fact that we could easily administer that. So we can easily see where the 25% slope is and kind of where that threshold is. I would mention that while 20 and 25% are pretty low for like a complete prohibition, I think it would be reasonable to have like an added layer of review for those slopes that are like somewhere between 15 and 30%. So you don't prohibit development there, but there's some additional considerations. And then the last point that I would make is just that most, or if not all, of the other ordinances that I reviewed allow for implementation of the ordinance by a zoning administrator, and thus not requiring large escrow fees or the township engineer to get involved. And so I think, there's certainly going to be cases where a property owner will be required to hire an engineer, but I think that should be not the rule, kind of like an extenuating circumstance. I don't want to have an ordinance where we're regularly requiring private property owners to hire engineers. I think that we want to, figure out how to draft an ordinance that can be administered by our zoning administrator. And then the burden of proof of providing information would fall on the applicant. And so geotechnical information can be requested on a case-by-case basis, but not mandated in the ordinance as a kind of no matter what, so.
So a few things, just to clarify policy-wise, we're looking for a max threshold that we're comfortable with. And we're looking for kind of a trigger as to when additional review needs to take place, right? Or a threshold of review. I really appreciated the example from Fishback. I thought that was helpful context, just to kind of get to see what that does to a property.
Yeah, and I apologize, I forgot to mention, so the property owner is actually here, is here in the audience and can speak to it in more detail, but if you'll recall, several years ago, this property was actually one that was brought forth to the Planning Commission with a sketch plan review. So the developer was looking at several hundred units to be developed on that parcel. It's pretty steep slope. So you'll see what they did with what they had Fishback do was kind of show what the buildable areas are using 15%, 20%, 25, 30, and 35%, just as an example of kind of what parts of that site would be developable.
Right.
Under the different provisions. I think that, as with the zoning ordinance subcommittee, as we discuss the steep slopes protection, I think that there were kind of two main goals associated with it. One is for the erosion water quality protection in the environmentally sensitive areas, but the other discussion is about kind of preserving those, forested hillsides and a desire not to, clear cut those and develop right on top of the hillside. So I think that those are two important considerations when you're looking at policies.
Sure. Thoughts?
I kind of like what Benzonia did, where they have a steep and then very steep. And I think having different rules and regulations for those two categories makes more sense than trying to get one, once again, one size fits all. And I think that would be more flexible here.
I like that too, Paul. It sounds like 15 is too restrictive. So what does that trigger look like to you guys?
Claire was saying the USDA and their web soil application, they can drill down and determine 25%. So that would be a good, at
What?
least in my opinion, level, so
As
that.
being restrictive.
Mhm.
Yeah, well, Benzonia has 15 to 25 and then 25 plus.
Mhm.
And I think they, again, they're covering the waterfront on that, rather than just saying at this point.
Are we willing to make changes recommended by the watershed as well in combination? Yeah.
I mean, Paul, I think that might be kind of a good starting point, is maybe that's your steep and very steep threshold. Anything from 25 below kind of falls into a category where we take care of it internally with the administrator and get above that, kick it over to engineers. Is that reasonable?
I could get on board with that.
Is that, Claire, consistent with everybody you talk to? Would that seem like a reasonable threshold, 25%?
I think that is reasonable. I think that of those that I talked to, they were looking at closer to 20 to 33%, so I think that is.
Has there been any that were in that higher category that have come back and an engineer's like, nope, can't be done? They're all saying, yes, we're engineers, we can figure it out? That's where my head was at.
There's the water quality and.
There's always a way.
To protect the natural vegetation and those types of goals, but then there's also just the structural integrity. So I
Yeah.
think there's kind of those two pieces. The engineers are more looking at just kind of making sure that there's not going to be slope failure.
So we're landing at 25 being kind of the top that we'll do in-house, and anything above that, it's being farmed out. Is that reading the tea leaves about right?
Well, I mean, I think when I read the Benzonia example, when it's over 25%, they're not necessarily requiring that engineering study. So, but I can pull from that Benzonia example and have kind of two tiers and have more specific stringent regulations when it's over 25%.
Okay.
And see if we can still have it be something that is in some cases administered, or it would still be administered by our zoning administrator, but there would be, in some cases, an additional engineering analysis required by the applicant to provide.
Got it.
Yeah, they even state in here that the zoning administrator shall decide whether or not the steep slope, which is the lower one, has been shown with sufficient accuracy on the applicant's plans. So it does give you that flexibility. And then once you go beyond, the 25, then you call in the pro.
You feel like you got good direction on this one? Okay.
And going to try to work some of the recommendations from the watershed in there too.
I did reach out to Heather, and so she sent me the examples that I provided from the communities that are in your packet.
Yep.
And she provided some, just some kind of
General guidance.
So,
So are we looking for steep slopes, not within 100 feet of a waterway? Are we going to add any of that additional language or anything prohibiting tree removal? We do have some of that, but on certain slopes and a certain percentage. And then limiting the stormwater runoff, impervious surface coverage, all of that. Rolling all that in or pointing to other ordinances
So I
for
think
coverage?
I would recommend probably keeping it at the 50 feet, just because that's our vegetative buffer, and so just for consistency.
Okay.
But I will definitely circle back with Heather as we start to draft language.
Okay. I'd appreciate that, thanks.
Okay. We're two down. On to letter C. We got two more conversations to have. But letter C is permeable pavers, next on the docket. Back to you, Claire.
So permeable pavers, so for any residential parcels that are not requiring a stormwater permit, we have limitations on impervious surface to protect water quality and properly manage stormwater on site. So over the last few months, and I would welcome Paul to speak in more detail on this, but there's been several variance requests in the Lakes area that have come before the Zoning Board of Appeals to exceed the allowable impervious surface maximum. So the Zoning Board of Appeals has heard a number of different variance requests, and one policy option that we could take a look at would be to allow for more flexibility on these very small parcels, while still protecting the environment, would be to allow for driveways to be constructed using permeable pavement systems. So one note that I'd make is that these would not be allowed within that 50-foot vegetative buffer, so we'd keep that buffer fully intact if we looked at allowing these driveways to be made with permeable paver systems. I would also emphasize that a permeable paver system does not mean like a patio paver or crushed gravel, so it would be like an actual system where those are like multiple feet, where you've got the drainage stone underneath, and you've got the permeable system right above it. So in talking with our township engineer, he was very supportive of this text amendment, and talked about that the permeable paver system functions a lot like an underground stormwater basin, and can be very effective. So I will note that these systems are very expensive to install, so I don't think we're going to see a ton of them, but I think in specific instances when they're very small parcels and a property owner is looking for some flexibility is where we would see those.
I'll second that. We've had a number of situations that in the Lakes area particularly, the sizes of the parcels of property is very small. And on top of that, they're in some cases, very oddly shaped. And this has caused some problems, and quite frankly, we would entertain having some more flexibility to be able to provide to people, to be able to do what they want to do, and not, right now, we're up against, the zoning board has to follow the rules, and when the rules are so tight, it's really pretty tough. So if we can add some features and dimensions that would expand their flexibility, it's something to look at.
Is it primarily about driveways, Paul?
Yeah, in most cases, it has been in the fact that because of the slope of the property, they needed to do certain things with their driveways. And because the current regulation says that a driveway is considered part of the impermeable area, period, they were never able to come up to the 20%.
Yeah, so if we did take a look at this zoning amendment, it would be a very simple text amendment, which is basically modifying the definition of impervious to specifically, call out that the permeable paver systems are not considered impervious. Because right now, the way our definition of impervious is written is that it's any drivable surfaces. So the way that we've interpreted that means any drivable surfaces, even if it's a permeable paver system.
Yeah, and even if it doesn't have any asphalt or anything, it's still the driveway and therefore considered to be impermeable.
Impervious, the way our ordinance is written. So I have spoken to other communities that administer their ordinance basically using the cut sheets and the kind of some of those manufactured specifications of the permeable paver systems, and have had really no issues by allowing those systems. They include on their permit, that they must be maintained on it, washed out on an annual basis, and that, any type of enforcement would be taken if they were not functioning, that they would need to be maintained. And it's kind of, it would be on a complaint basis, similar to what we do with our stormwater. We don't have an engineer going out and inspecting stormwater basins and those types of things. But if there is a problem, then we would have the mechanism for enforcement and making sure that they were cleaned out and maintained.
But I would also say that in the process of planning this out, and you've touched on this, and I agree, that if in fact they can use this system, that it actually be engineered. It's not going to be something that, do it yourself, buying a bunch of paving stones and putting them down. I mean, you definitely have to have something to rely upon, that in the process itself is actually engineered with the lowest stratas and things of that nature, and make it clear to the people also that in reading through this material, this is not a one-off. I mean, you have to maintain this system, otherwise it just doesn't work.
So Claire, you mentioned in your comments as well as in the packet that you spoke with the township engineer. Is that Wade Trim? So Caitlin said that Wade Trim said it was nearly impossible to maintain these particular systems, and you need a special device to do so. But he's still then in favor of the text amendment?
That was my conversation a couple weeks ago. I will say Wade Trim is not one individual, so we've got a few different township engineers that we work with. So I talked with Brian Souza, I'm not sure.
No, she left.
So I can circle back and see.
Okay. It's just curious that we've got two potential different answers.
I'll say previous career, we used pervious pavers or permeable pavers on a couple projects, commercial applications, and they work great. One's probably about 15 years old now. And given soil conditions around here plays a factor too. Obviously, there's some clay in some spots, but most of the stuff is sand, and a lot of times you can't throw enough water at a site to get it to the pool. So I think this application in instances is great.
And that's actually a good point, like when you're reading through the technical specifications, if there is clay, it's not a good candidate, or you need to dig down deeper and put sand in replacement of the clay. So it can get very expensive, but I think as long as you're following those technical specifications and you're maintaining it is really kind of what the critical components of that.
I'm comfortable with this, especially with your number 3 as a disclaimer. You're doing this at your own risk. So, meaning as a landowner. And I've just working in community development for some time, this has become kind of mainstream for a lot of places, especially in places that struggle with this downstate, in places with clay. They use these a lot to offset stormwater management. So I don't see how it's a loss to us necessarily, especially if someone's making that investment. They'll probably take care of it, but.
So one thing that I will just mention is that the number 2 and number 3 are more about administering the ordinance. So including, the disclaimer would be on all land use permits, and in executing the provision, the zoning administrator would require that detailed design. So that's not necessarily something you're going to see reflected in the ordinance language, but that would be the way that we would administer it.
Thank you for that clarity. Anything else you need from us?
I don't think so.
Okay. We're cruising. Agriculture and Open Space Public Forum. Looks like you guys had some good conversations with our friends at MSU Extension.
Yeah, it was really good event, so thank you to the planning commissioners that were able to attend. We had approximately 20 East Bay residents attend. It was a beautiful evening, so we're happy to get 20. We heard informational presentation from MSU Extension and other local experts, and then kind of the breakout sessions was feedback on what elements of the current zoning ordinance are working well, and then what are some of the possible areas for improvement. And so the final activity was developing a list of policy options related to open space preservation and ranking those preferred policy options. So included in the packet, I've got a copy of the presentation because I thought it was very informational. It had a lot of great kind of policies and tools related to cluster development, as well as some trends in kind of the small agriculture, like micro agricultural space, and it was interesting to learn about that. But and then I also included all of the community feedback, the summary report that we received. But two of the policy options that really kind of rose to the top, one was just better cluster housing tools to ensure open space is preserved. And so I think that was one kind of low-hanging fruit that we could take a closer look at. Right now, our ordinance allows for cluster development in kind of to preserve open space. But with our cluster tool, you're really only preserving 30% of the site. And that 30% can really be fragmented throughout the site. And so then you get, if you look at some of the subdivisions that have been done using the cluster tool versus the ones that have been done using the traditional tool, you really can't tell much of a difference because they both have kind of those common areas, but they don't have like significant, I think we saw some really cool examples of open space preservation that was done where, 80% of the site was preserved and then 20% of the site was developed, and you can have like a community septic system and a little bit more creative tools to preserve larger portions of the site and then have a little bit more density, and that could even be done. So anyway, I think that's something worth looking at, and then that doesn't have that negative impact that the Planning Commission heard from farmers where, we have an expectation where we can get X number of units on this parcel and, that's our retirement, those types of things, while still preserving some open space. Because for me, from a land use policy perspective, it's tough to see kind of those low-density subdivisions going in outside of our urban growth boundary. I think that we really need to think about how can we really incentivize development within the urban growth boundary where we have water and sewer. And if we're not decreasing the density outside of the urban growth boundary, we have to look at other policy options.
Would that mean that we'd be looking at the ordinance on clustering and redefining that to... Yeah. By the way, I was at the thing, and the presentation on clustering was excellent. It was a really good presentation.
Did you take that by chance?
We didn't, no, we didn't have our Leah text up there, so.
Okay.
But it is.
Farming trends
We did try
presentation
to,
was
we've
really
got
interesting.
photos of kind of all of the, and then we've got.
Yeah, I saw all of that in the packet. Yeah,
unfortunately-
just curious.
Unfortunately, we do not have a recording of it.
So a couple things. One, another question to raise was, to your point, Paul, another way to do it is to raise, the minimum acreage, right? For developable land, because right now we're at 1. And I remember when we first kind of brought this up, there was literally pitchforks about raising that. So I'm not saying let's take that on. But in terms of I like the idea of the clustering and kind of getting more aggressive about it, but putting maybe like a maximum amount of acreage that you can develop if you're going to go that route, so that sure, you got to keep X amount open, but then say, this is the most that we want you to do, so that it does have a different inherent style of development. And maybe that allows some flexibility of sizes, but I'm with you. I don't want to see 2-acre parcels chewing up a whole 40 with the road that goes through it.
I have to agree with you. When I went to the meeting, I was under the impression that we were going to have more farmers there. That based on the meeting that we had here, where it was, as you say, literally pitchforks, I thought that we were going to have that type of discussion, but it turned out to be something completely different, namely education as well as some other items. But it dawned to me that we're at a situation right now where, and they proved it nationwide, but basically the farms we have, they're going to be gone. And so the best thing that we can do now is to put into effect those rules, regulations, and incentives that keeps as much as the open space that we would have, and something that would be more managed as far as the development, as opposed to, as you say, 40 homes on 40 acres, and they're all the same. I mean, it's just, there's other ways at this point. And so I walked away from there thinking that it was much more of a challenge to basically put in the new rules and regulations, especially around the clustering. Would you agree?
Yeah, I guess my takeaway was, one, that there's obviously some people doing really creative stuff to preserve open space, and that the trend in farming from large acreage farms down to really unique kind of 10, 5-acre farms where they're doing like a farm market and they're doing cut flowers, whatever they're doing, that I think we should, any way we can, encourage that if we're going to start losing the 500 and 700-acre farms or whatever, 150-acre farms, which some of our local farmers mentioned in that, at least in my breakout, and then the guy who did the overall nationwide thing was really kind of stunning. The numbers of family farms are just kind of going away.
Yeah.
And one thing with our new ordinance, we do have a lot more provisions for value-added ag, so we did kind of take some of those best practices from MSU Extension, and that's in our ordinance. Kind of the trick is, getting, it's still challenging to get farmers to find that that's a viable route to go, but we do have that policy is in place for more creative, smaller farms with some value-added agriculture.
So I find it interesting that the, public comment on that was so loud, and a number of those didn't attend this session, right?
I think we only had one farmer there.
There's a table of like 3, I think, and then
Okay.
had someone.
But not the big farm that had like 10 people here, right?
No.
There was a family with, I think, 9 siblings.
Yeah.
And I believe that most of that land has been sold since
Oh.
since the meeting.
Oh, okay. That answers that question.
Interesting.
So next steps looks like reconsider of our cluster ordinance, basically, that we will take up. What's your timeline looking like, Claire?
Next month.
It would probably be put
Fall?
behind, probably not fall, because we've got the temporary dwelling ordinance, we've got the steep slopes, and we've got the permeable pavers, so I'd probably put it next in line.
Well, we've got the ADU too.
Does the planning commission want to take a look at open back up the ADU ordinance?
I
Sounds like we
personally,
need to.
what that gentleman said is exactly the reason I think this whole thing for me was important. I mean, to be able to have your son and daughter-in-law live on your
Yeah.
property because they can't afford $500,000 house, I mean,
Yeah.
that's,
And I did think that he was in a situation where he has a parcel that's large, and it's, it's legal conforming, so I would I told him that I'd bring it to the planning commission and give you the opportunity on whether or not you wanted to take it up again, because I know we've talked about it a lot, so.
yeah.
Sure.
As simply as you put it, though, with the size constraints, I mean, not to jump too far ahead, but that seems reasonable.
I think that I thought that was a good approach by Long Lake Township, because then it's not an arbitrary 2 acres,
Right.
half acre.
Right.
It needs to be ordinance
Right.
requirement,
I mean,
so
if
this
you're,
would be fifth in line behind temporary dwelling.
I like the fact that Long Lake is only dealing with conforming
yeah.
properties.
But then when you go, like, you go downtown Traverse City and you see, there's some ridiculous, beautiful stuff that's shoehorned into a, 40-foot lot.
Tell me about it.
So would ADUs be allowed, would ADUs have to be on conforming lots in all zoning districts or only in the environmentally sensitive zoning districts?
Oh, I would say all.
I would say all.
All.
And we've got a lot more flexibility now because we allow smaller parcels in the low density mod, in all our urban growth boundaries, so, okay, sounds good. And so ADUs.
And they would be attached to septic, right?
Right, yep, that's part of it.
So that would play, the septic, would that, so it's not a sale, so the county rules won't necessarily apply to
No,
ensure.
They would.
They would?
Yep, so
Okay, with an ADU, they would?
Yep, so
Okay,
that
thank you
would
for
be-
clarifying that.
That would be, it would need to meet the county health department septic, so if they were on septic, they would need to meet county health department septic permits, and
Okay.
If they were on water and sewer, then they would need to get the, pay the REU and get the. pay the
Okay,
benefit fee.
all right, thanks for clarifying that, I appreciate that.
Okay. Anything else you need from us? Feels like we've got it buttoned up. We'll bring it back to public comment round 2. Anybody else want a second crack at it? Come on up to the lectern. Please give us your name.
My name is Greg Holwerda. Our company is Sterling Homes and Land. We own it's 4 parcels in East Bay that we've had Fishbeck do some work on for us, and that's in your packet this evening. And I just wanted to come out tonight, I think, to talk a little bit about what happens in the realm of home building and land development when there's restrictions on steep slopes. And I think in short, what we're doing, right, is we're creating do not disturb areas, and we need to go around those then and leave them be. And I think that's a handicapper, I think, for attainable housing right out of the gate, because you're simply, you can't get the density that you would otherwise, and there's added costs to go around. And I think I brought a little sketch here. Basically, what happens, right, when you buy a piece of land and decide we're going to go to work on it and create a residential development, we're going to our engineer, we're kind of defining a work area, and one of the first things that happens on the site is you're going to define that work area with stakes and probably some silt fencing, and then if it's a more compact cluster type development, which we're doing more of, and I think the reasons for that are pretty good these days. You're pretty much clearing out the inside of that silt fenced area or work area, and then the next step is what we call mass grading, and you're getting into the big machinery that is knocking down the high spots, filling in the low spots, so you can actually, the black line represents a road, and the green line represents existing topography. So that's kind of how it works, and I think that the thing to remember when you look at when you think about this concept, and when you look at the inserts in your packet from Fishbeck. The red areas that they've, I brought up the 15% and the 35%. The red areas that my right hand is 15, my left hand is 35. Those red areas don't really tell the whole story, because you cannot cut at the base of a steep slope, nor can you fill at the base of a steep slope, because in doing so, you're tampering with it. So the actual do not disturb area gets larger than what it shows on these drawings because of that. It's kind of like if you're gonna save a beautiful specimen of a 150-year-old oak tree in the middle of a property where there needs to be some cutting and filling. I mean, I've seen that done in developments, but you can't bring the dirt in right up to the tree, right, or you kill the tree. And I think that's what happens here is if you bring dirt in to fill adjacent to or up against steep slopes, you've tampered with the steep slope, and that's just something I wanted to mention. So I think some of what I heard in the discussion makes sense to me. I think there are certain slopes that you guys are going to decide up to what threshold it's basically, monitored in-house. And then it sounds like, the door would be open to activities on steeper slopes, providing there wouldn't be, any risk of, soil erosion or structural instability at a later date or things like that. So that sounded good to me. I think, that's all I've got. Thank you.
Thanks for the demonstration.
Yeah, you bet.
John Hollander, East Bay resident. Just a clarification, you brought up a point when we were talking about tent city and all that. You could have 4 somethings on your property, and you wanted to include like a motorcycle and or a camper. That, I think you almost have to keep them separate. If you have a 1/4 acre lot, you can have 4 motorcycles, but you could only have 1 tent or 1 camper. So maybe you understand what I'm trying to say, is that you almost have to have the campers separate from whatever other ordinance you have about you're allowed to have 4 somethings on your property. That's all.
Thank you, John. Okay.
Steve McQuarrie again. Now, I might have missed something, like in our subdivision, originally it was you could have a recreational vehicle, boat, camper, jet ski, snowmobile, seasonal use. Then some people had a problem with that. Then they tried to restrict it, and they tried getting too restrictive, so enough people rebelled, and now it's April 1st, like campers and boats. April 1st through November 30th, 31st, whatever the end of November is, when you're using it. They've toyed with trying to do the camping, not camping, kids staying in a, out-of-town relatives. So what are you guys actually proposing? And like, I have a camper, store it in my yard. It's there April through November. Is that conforming or non-conforming? I'm asking a question. Can I do that?
Yeah, you can, but to be honest with you, I think the best way to address this would be to set up some time with Claire, and she could kind of walk you through it.
Okay, because.
We don't get into too much debate at this point
Right,
in
I
the
can see
conversation, but yeah.
We need more people to come to these things, because to me, this just seems so arbitrary, the time frame and everything, and maybe you need to do a mass mailing to residents in East Bay Township, so you might get a better turnout.
We have.
And I like the way the guy did the surveys. I mean, he didn't come to my house, but, okay, thank you for your time.
Appreciate it. Yep.
My name is Paul DeYoung, East Bay Township, Potter Road. I have not been to these meetings before, so I'm a little bit maybe in the dark. I cannot for the life of me figure out why the township is spending time doing this, other than the fact that the township years ago spent time doing it and they did it wrong, restricting everything. I really don't understand how the township has that much time to deal with things that are not that important. The things that are important might be noise ordinances, if that's the problem, or there might be drunk and disorderly conduct, if that's a problem. But camping on your own property, I still don't get it, even after your explanation. I still don't get why the ordinances, why the rules. Any response?
Yeah, we typically don't go back and forth again at this point,
I
but,
saw that, I read the little thing out in the.
yep, but, no, again, we don't typically get into this, but yeah, we've been at this for like 2 years, truly, in this debate. And so the fact that this group, which to be honest with you, I'm very appreciative of everyone having the conversations, because I'll be honest, you don't get this a lot in planning commissions where they have different perspectives. In here, believe me, every side of one topic, and this being a topic that's been very sensitive over the last 2 years of conversation. So we appreciate you coming in to hear about all of it. And it is something that they've been very, just, I would say, open-minded to hear all the different sides of it. And the fact that we've gotten this far, I think is a great kudos to how this community operates, because many of them would have either closed the door or opened it wide up. And this group, I think, takes a very long look at all the options and weighs it fairly well. So I appreciate your perspective. We've gotten a lot of them from a lot of different folks over the last 2 years. So again, thank you to my commission for hearing all of it and deliberating the way that you all do and hearing everybody out.
Well, my perspective would be to enforce the noise ordinance, enforce the drunk and disorderly conduct ordinances, or if you don't have them, spend time making those ordinances. Camping in your property, that's just, I don't get it. I still don't get it. So open it up as wide as you can. And maybe discuss fixing Potter Road on the east end.
Jeff, round two?
Just a brief one.
Okay.
You know, part of the a lot of motivation here from friends and neighbors, not so much myself, really doesn't pertain to me. I really don't have an issue with how it is. But I want to say, it only took me like a couple days' time to get that stack, and it was over 100 that I collected, but there's other people that didn't bring them in to you folks that have probably just as much. And on those ones that I have over 100, some of them are 2 to 4 people in that residence that put their name on it. It happened quickly. My motivation was, I heard that there was a petition signed by all the folks over on Lakes area. Well, some of those folks on there I know, well, they didn't sign up to beat up camping in the ordinance. They more had a lot of things on that issue. And there was like marinas and all the other things. There's a lot of things going on in the lakes, Arbutus and Spider at that time, that prompted everybody to get on. But a lot of those people also said they had a problem with the ADUs and the camping part of it, as I noticed. But I also saw 0 signatures on that. I personally went, and other people did the same thing I did. It got a mind of its own. I'm like, holy smokes. And they would just start telling me about it and giving them to other people. I just brought the ones I got in, because I could stand here and look at you all. I did that personally, and I got their opinions. 0 people said no. One guy just, I can't, but I'm not going to contribute to the township's game, is what they basically said. But he did give me a beer. That was a good deal. So we sat and drank a beer, and we all got along, and I think we get along pretty good in the township overall. But Yeah, it's just crazy. Nobody wants that much limitations. Most of the lakes area is tight. A lot of those lots are tight. You're not going to get a bunch of campers in there. You're not going to get a big camper in there. When I was going around in the lakes area quite a bit, there wasn't anybody that was really upset about neighbors camping or doing anything. They were more upset about bigger things that were influencing our township. And again, the paper that I had privy to look at had a lot of names on there, and I contacted some of them. They didn't sign up to beat up on camping. They were about the whole program, what was going on in Spider and Arbutus with overdevelopment on it, some of the big McMansions, if you will. And it seemed like they had other, and I'm not privy to all the stuff, and I appreciate everybody, what they've done. And I get that. If I'm in the real small area, you know, that's a little different. I'm glad you're addressing the steep slopes, because I saw firsthand and listened to people what it did to them. It's definitely affected them, and the extra engineering on all that costs them a lot of money to do. It's really cost prohibitive. We are trying to get more people squeezed into our county and township evidently in a hurry. It's going crazy around here, and it seems like there should be some openings for the ADUs also, like this gentleman here, depending on size of property and how it's going. I'm glad you're hopefully going to look at that again too, because it changes what we do with the property. We used to have acreage, we have acreage still, but it was lakes area and it was ag. And we have Christmas trees, we have a cellar we put food up in, we have multiple gardens, we have fruit trees. We were going to expand on that, but, you know, the rug was pulled out from under us, yet we're not ag anymore. You guys pulled that away. When I complained about that, it fell on mute ears. Now it's lakes area, and because it's acreage, you know, we look at it a little bit different than just the lakes area, and that's just something different. But it does, I get it with that parcel, trying to figure out how many you're going to put on there. But like I say, in the lakes area, you're not going to cram a bunch of units in there. There's just not physically room for it. So, and I didn't have a lot of people that had I didn't have anybody that had problems with their neighbors in there. And I do have to say, more people would show up here, but these chairs are pretty darn uncomfortable. If we could swap once in a while, or, you know. But I appreciate they have some padding, but they aren't the most comfortable chairs for everybody. And I would like to see more people come, but most residents don't take the time. They don't know about this. They're not educated. They don't take the time because they're all living their lives getting by. We're hoping that everybody hears, and you are doing a great job of it, but there's not a good way that you've really reached out to everybody and educated on a lot of the stuff that happens. It all happens before we're aware of it. You know, I've been here for 40-some years. I landed my hot air balloon in most of these folks' property. You know, and I met the wrong end of a rifle a couple times, or shotgun, but we worked it out, thank God. I'm still here. But, you know, there's a lot of great things going on in the township, but we've got to give more freedom to the people, because they're really upset about not having the right to do what they want with their dirt. So thank you very much for everything.
You're welcome. Thanks, Jeff. All right, so much for being brief this evening. We'll wrap it up, and appreciate everybody. Our next meeting is Tuesday, August 5th at 6:30, and with that, we're adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Brenda, thank you. Oh, sorry.